Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar on using Nutanix as the platform for your EUC strategy. My name is Justin Leonard and I am the Global Head of Cloud Transformation here at Exclusive Networks, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Paul Murray, the EUC Solution Architect for Nutanix. Paul has spent the vast majority of his career working in this space, having spent 16 years at Citrix prior to joining Nutanix just over 4 years ago. Today we're going to cover the following topics. Firstly, a high-level overview of end-user computing, drivers for organisations to implement an EUC strategy, as well as the types of organisations and personas within them that are relevant. Secondly, the offerings that Nutanix has that supports these organisational drivers. And thirdly, how Nutanix fits into the wider EUC ecosystem. So I've worked in IT for over 20 years, and one of the common themes over those years have been related to end user computing, whether that's been in the guise of thin client computing or VDI. I also remember when working in this space, every year was heralded as being the year of the desktop. However, as we've seen the rapid speed of technology innovation occur over the last 3 to 4 years specifically, we've seen this mirrored in what's happening in the EUC space. So concepts such as choose your own device and the employee owned bring your own device have come to the forefront, as has things like desktop as a service, as organizations want to leverage some of the existing cloud investments that they've already made. And we've also seen a rapid evolution in the types of devices that people use. They no longer work simply with a desktop or a laptop that gets carried everywhere. So now we've seen the advent of the term virtual client computing, as this encompasses solutions to fit all of these devices. So what I see from a driver perspective is I see that the EUC opportunity is really significant and it's rapidly growing. However, for organizations, this causes them a little bit of a conundrum. It's about striking the right balance between providing flexibility to users whilst also ensuring security, governance and compliance within their infrastructure. So on the user front, employees are the biggest single driver for EUC solutions. So in a recent survey by REBA, which is the Reward and Employees Benefits Association, they found that 69% of all employees said that flexible working was either essential or very important to them. The survey also found that in organizations that do not have flexible working options, 15% of employees were actively considering moving to an organization that would offer them a more flexible working environment, and 42% would have their head turned by an organization that offered flexible working. However, if we flip that over to the organizational front, what we've seen specifically with the recent coronavirus pandemic, the demand for remote working solutions has grown pretty much exponentially. Organizations that may have had small parts of their workforce able to work remotely have now almost overnight had to rethink their strategy and think about how they get the remainder of their workforce set up to work remotely. And for many organizations, this equates to hundreds, thousands, or even into the tens of thousands of employees. And therein lies the problem. It's not simply the case that an organization can ship an employee a laptop and a screen and say, there you go, you're now able to work from home, problem solved. It's about getting the right balance between giving the workers a consumer grade user experience and the right enterprise grade security and controls. So we're seeing a major partner opportunity in this space. So organizations are under pressure to implement solutions that will help them to remain operational throughout these times of uncertainty, and having trusted partners that can help them to do this is of critical importance. And we're really seeing organizations fall roughly into two categories that are needing support. So first, that's organizations that have got existing EUC solutions. They've likely got a solution of choice that they've previously evaluated and selected, but now their challenge is to rapidly scale out what they've got to the wider workforce. Second, organizations that don't have an existing EUC solution, and they need to quickly get up and running to help them support their customers. And they can't afford to spend many months going through a technology selection profile. They need to go and drive that rapidly to get their business back up and running. And typically what we've seen in both of these types of cases is we've seen that the sales cycles have shortened from typically, many months where there's an evaluation, a proof of concept and a pilot, and then eventually the solution gets deployed, to actually significant opportunities and significant projects with many hundreds of thousands of dollars that quite often have closed within days. So with that, I'm now going to hand over to Paul, who's going to help us understand what the benefits of VDI are over some of the more traditional forms of desktop computing, and how that will help organizations that are needing to support a more mobile workforce. So Paul, over to you.
Okay, so first of all, thanks for the introduction, Justin. So like yourself, I've been doing this stuff for more than 20 years. I guess you could call me long in the tooth, or the polite version may be experienced. So, I mean, to answer the question about the benefits of VDI over traditional computing, traditional desktop computing, I mean, if you've been working in the VDI environment for a while, you've probably heard things such as the benefits being productivity. So in terms of both the user's productivity or the employee's productivity and the IT administrator. There's other expressions that I use, so security, secure access is also one of the benefits around VDI. We can then take that a step further, talk about centralized management. So essentially what you're doing with a VDI infrastructure is you're basically relocating your applications from the end user's devices into a centralized data center. So the benefit there is that helps the companies in the sense that the infrastructure is being managed by people that actually understand how to manage this, how to manage data centers, how to manage these complex environments. And then another one you often hear from the EUC vendors, so Citrix and VMware, is the any client ability. So the ability to be able to connect to your applications, to your virtual desktops through essentially any client. If you look at the way the industry describes that, they'll talk about end user computing being the ability to be able to empower today's workforce with secure access to desktops, applications and data from essentially any device over any connection. But I think the one thing that is important for today's climate is the ability to be able to allow your workforce to work from anywhere. Okay, if you look at the coronavirus, if you look at what some governments are doing, they're essentially stipulating that people need to be able to work from home. So this is one of the key benefits about a VDI, is that any part of the expression. So like I said, any device being able to connect over any network to your centralized infrastructure, to your VDI infrastructure. What's also important about VDI is, you mentioned it briefly, I can scale out an existing deployment. So I got a couple of words about that later on, but I can take an existing deployment. So an example I'll talk about is you have a Nutanix cluster, there is a Citrix deployment or a VMware deployment on there that supports today a few hundred users. And with very simple features, with just a few mouse clicks, I can essentially expand that to support thousands, tens of thousands of employees connecting to that infrastructure. So again, the scalability, the speed at which you can scale that deployment is also essential in today's climate as a benefit of the VDI solution.
Thanks, Paul. That's really great information. So what I'd be interested to understand is, can you unpack in a little bit more detail what EUC offerings Nutanix have, why they're applicable here, and how they tie into some of the other EUC technologies that are out there?
So, interesting question. I mean, I hate that statement. Interesting question, good question, but it is important for today's discussion. So why did Nutanix build it, or what did we actually build? So there's two important aspects here. First of all, I need to explain the difference between our on-prem solutions and our cloud solutions. And secondly, how those products fit into these two different segments. So let's take a look at the on-prem stuff. This is essentially our HCI platform, so the hyperconverged infrastructure platform. That's something that we've been doing for many, many years. So Nutanix has just turned 10 years old now. Our first product shipped was probably 8 years ago, 9 years ago. But it's based around a thing that we call web scale. So in practical terms, that means you have the ability to be able to build a platform, in this case for your VDI solutions, for your VDI workloads, which can support tens of thousands of users. It's also important to note that the HCI infrastructure allows for a very consistent linear scalability. So again, if you tie that to today's situation where a company has to stand up an environment for hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of users, this linear scalability becomes essential. It's also extremely important that that scalability is consistent as I scale out this architecture. In practical terms, what that means is I can start small today with a few hundred users, and I can scale that out to a few more hundred users, 1,000 users, 10,000 users, as your requirements dictate. We do that with a thing that we call one-click simplicity. So again, it's a marketing concept, but the idea behind one-click simplicity is I can expand that existing Nutanix cluster, that Nutanix environment, as my needs dictate. It's one of the key differentiators between our technology and other HCI technologies. It's also a reason why the Nutanix HCI platform has essentially become the platform of choice for a VDI deployment. We like to say that VDI is part of our DNA. If you go back a few years, this is essentially where we started. That was one of the most successful workloads in a Nutanix environment. If you look at the other part, so the desktop as a service solution, or if you have that requirement to follow a cloud-first strategy, then you're naturally led towards a desktop as a service solution. We have our own product. So our product is called XiFrame. There are other technologies out there that compete with XiFrame. So XiFrame or Frame, there's a few benefits around that compared to other technologies. First of all, it's what we like to call multi-cloud. So with XiFrame, as a customer, you have the choice of where your workloads run. So your Windows desktops, they could run on an Azure platform, they could run on AWS, they could run on Google Cloud. It could also be a combination of all three platforms. So you have complete flexibility in where you run those workloads. There's another possibility there when we start to talk about hybrid cloud. So we can also run Frame on-prem on AHV. So essentially what you build with the Frame solution is you can build a pure cloud-based infrastructure. You can integrate your on-prem AHV stuff. And what we essentially end up with is a hybrid cloud solution. So big benefits there. The access to these desktops in the cloud, that happens through a standard browser. So your end users, your employees, they don't need any specific requirements on that endpoint. The only thing they have to have is a modern web browser. So Edge, Internet Explorer, a few others, Chrome, Firefox, whatever, they're all HTML5 web browsers or HTML5 aware web browsers. So as a user, as an employee, I can use that web browser to be able to connect to my centralized desktops. So one thing I'd also like to point out is Citrix Cloud. So Citrix have this offering called Cloud Services. Essentially, it's their management plane, so all the infrastructure required to manage a Citrix environment, so the virtual apps and desktops, is cloud-based. They did that to simplify the management for their customers. So we can also tie into that. So what you can essentially do is you can build or you can consume your Citrix management pieces from Citrix Cloud as a service, or a cloud-based service, but you can also deploy your VDI workloads, so your Zen app, Zen desktop, virtual apps and desktop deployments on-prem on a Nutanix cluster. So again, we're bringing together both of those worlds, the cloud management plane and the security of running your workloads on-prem on your Nutanix clusters. That's something unique to the Citrix Nutanix value proposition.
Many thanks, Paul. Maybe you could unpack a little bit more for us on the use cases that you would advise we focus in on. What types of organisation are these relevant for? And I think most importantly, who are going to be the key stakeholders within those organisations that you need to be talking to, and what are going to be their specific pain points?
So, okay, and also here, I mean, they're extremely important questions. I mean, I'll try to make the difference between sort of traditional VDI or traditional end user computing as it was 6 months ago and compare it to the current situation. So if you look at use cases or you look at target organizations, the people you should be talking to, 6 months ago, that could be essentially anyone. So we did. So when I worked at Citrix, we talked about specific use cases. So it could be remote office, branch office, security, work from home, bring your own device, all those sort of things. I think for today's climate, the essential one is work from home. Like you've said a couple of times, like I said a couple of times, IT administrators are now confronted with a situation where they need to build an environment for potentially tens of thousands of users. If you look at the target organizations, the key people within those organizations, again, the difference between 6 months ago and today, I mean, 6 months ago, I would have said you would need to talk to maybe the virtualization administrator. So he's got all the skills in the virtualization platform. You could talk to the network admin, that's possible, or that'd be a possibility to get into those accounts. And then the classic ones would be the desktop admin or the applications administrator. So those last two, the app admin and the desktop admin, those are the guys that you need to be talking to today. The reason you need to talk to those are, again, we said it enough times, is they're confronted with the situation of having to stand up an environment for many, many more users, whether it's numbers of thousands or whether it's 80%, 90% of the workforce, they are confronted with a big, big challenge. A couple of examples of customers that I know of that have gone through that process the last few weeks. So I can't name the names. It's a big company based in Spain. They're a long-time Citrix customer. They've just ordered I can't talk about numbers, but a very, very big deal. It was planned to do that at some point in time, but the whole coronavirus situation has accelerated that whole process. So again, talk to your desktop admins, talk to the application admins. Those are the guys that are under pressure to be able to spin up these environments. Like I said, they really need that help right now. If you look at the cloud concepts of desktop as a service, another example is based from a customer in the States. The customer there, they had nothing to do with VDI, so VDI was a completely foreign concept to these guys. What they did was they heard about this ZyFrame stuff that I just mentioned. They phoned us up. So the idea behind ZyFrame is pay as you grow, or pay as you need it, pay as you require it. Like I said, they phoned us up. A couple of hours later, with the CIO on the line, we'd essentially deployed that infrastructure in the cloud, and their employees the next day came online and started to use those virtual desktops. So again, there's different sizes, different classes of organizations, but essentially the desktop admins, the application admins, they're under pressure. When it comes to deployment options, again, the difference between what it was 6 months ago and today, the only thing I would suggest that you need to ask your customers is, do you already have an on-prem solution? Again, whether that be VMware based or whether it's Citrix based, doesn't really matter. So if those customers, or if your customers already have a VDI deployment, you just need to expand that. Don't get involved in selling new technologies, selling new products, or adding different pieces into the equation. Just expand that existing cluster. Again, that resonates with the story from a few minutes ago with the one-click upgrades. I take that existing cluster, I expand it, add in that capacity. And what's essentially important here is that is linear. So I, as an admin, I can pretty much guarantee that the user experience and my end users is going to be the same as I scale that architecture out. If those customers, or if your customers don't have a VDI deployment, so if this VDI thing is completely foreign to them, I would suggest leading with Frame. So the desktop as a service, everything cloud first. It's easier, relatively, It's easier to set up, so easier in the sense that you don't need to be involved in the infrastructure. You just look after the desktops. You just manage the desktops. So there's no infrastructure administration is required. So in that sense, it's easier. But to boil it down to the single question, again, you look at the official sales trainings that Citrix has, that VMware have, that we have. When it comes to talking about VDI, there's a set of questions that you should go through. I've tried to boil that down to a single question today. Do you already have something? If you do have something, expand it. If this whole thing is completely new to you, completely foreign to you, then start fresh with a desktop or a frame solution. There are different alternatives, but again, that sort of goes beyond the realms of this conference. So I hope that gives some insight into the use cases, the target organizations, and the deployment options.
Once again, many thanks for your time and input today. It's been hugely insightful and valuable. So to conclude, there really is a significant opportunity in this space, and one that the current situation with coronavirus has just simply accelerated. So what's next as a call for action? So there's three things that we'd ask you to do. Firstly, please go onto the Nutanix Expand portal and search for the Enable and Anywhere Workforce. There's a whole pile of assets that you can use with your customers. Number two, please use the training on Nutanix University to get you and your teams fully up to date on the Nutanix EUC capabilities. And thirdly, please engage with your exclusive networks and, where applicable, Nutanix account reps to start to drive account mapping and demand generation activities. And remember, exclusive networks has a whole host of supporting capabilities to help you at every stage in the sales and deployment cycle. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to watch this and wish you an enjoyable rest of your day.